Hey everyone, welcome to episode 5 of the My Favorite Norns script series. Today I'm going over MLR by 10. MLR is a live sample cutting platform made up of 6 buffers. After you record or load in audio to one of the buffers, there are a ton of different ways you can play with it. MLR is intimately linked with the grid, and most of today's video is going to be explaining how the grid interacts with the script. MLR has 3 main pages. The first page is the record page. I'm going to go over what is accessible from Norns first, and then I'll move on to what's on the grid. From this view, you can adjust the playback volume, speed mod, record volume, and overdub amount. Speed mod can be used to offset the playback speed of the buffer, and overdub amount will control how much of the previously recorded audio is preserved between loops. On Norns, you can press button 2 to switch between the parameters, and use encoders 2 and 3 to adjust them. Now moving on to the grid. Just like the controls for Otis, this may look overwhelming, but it's actually really simple once you get the hang of it. The controls for the 6 buffers are all identical, so I'm going to explain the controls for buffer 1 only. Once again, I'm naming the rows 1 through 8 and the columns A through P. 1A, B, and C are how you navigate between the different menu pages. 1E through 1H are gesture recorders. If you press one of them, it arms recording. Once record armed, you can press any of the buffer's controls to record your movements. 1I through 1L are the macro buttons. These behave similarly to the gesture recorders, except instead of recording movements, they record the current state of the controls. If you arm one of them and then make adjustments to the controls and press it again, it will take a snapshot of the current state. 1O is the quantization toggle. If this is enabled, it will lock any buffer that is tempo mapped to its tempo and beat division. 1P is the Alt button. If you press Alt and the quantization button, it will bring up the time menu. From here, you can change the global tempo as well as the quantization division. Holding Alt and pressing any of the gesture controls or macro buttons will wipe it. Next, we have the buffer controls. Like I said, I'm only going to go over the controls for buffer 1 since 1 through 6 are identical. Starting with 2A, we have the record toggle button. When this button is illuminated, it means that the buffer is record armed. 2C and D are the focus buttons. Pressing those will snap focus to that buffer. If you hold Alt and press either 2C or D, you will toggle on tempo mapping for that buffer. You can tell if tempo mapping is on by whether or not 2E is illuminated. 2H will toggle the playback direction. If it's illuminated, that means the buffer is playing in reverse. 2I through 2O are the playback speed controls. 2L is normal playback speed, and if you go to the right or left, the speed will either double or halve. Finally, 2P is the mute button. If this button isn't illuminated, it means the buffer is muted. The second page is the cut page. The only available control on Norns here is the buffer volume. On the grid though, we have a lot more going on. This page shows the playback location for each buffer as it plays. Pressing in any row will start playback from that location. To stop playback, hold Alt and press in the same row again. We can also make loops here. Pressing a button, holding it, and then pressing another in the same row will loop that selection. The gesture controls and macro controls are also available here and function the same way they did in the record page. The gesture controls can be used to slice whatever audio you have in a buffer rhythmically. The macro controls can be used to move between different loop sections of the buffer. The final page is the clip page. On Norns, you can use encoder 2 to cycle between loading, clearing, or saving the current buffer. And pressing button 2 will perform that action. Encoder 3 will resize the buffer, and pressing button 3 will perform that action. On the grid, you can select which clip is playing back in each buffer. I know that was a lot of information, so I'm going to do a real quick demo on how to get started recording. First, go to the cut page and create a loop. Now we can return to the record page. I'm going to set the overdub amount to 1 so we can have it loop. And I'm going to record arm the track. Now that it's looping, we can change the speed. And we can do some gesture recording. I'm going to add another track. I'm going to use a macro control. Now when I press these, the speed of track 2 will be recalled. Like I said earlier, you can also use the gesture controls to cut up the sample that's in the buffer. There isn't a ton in the parameters page that isn't accessible from the main menu. The only additional controls are pan, pre, and rate and level slew. MLR's buffers are mono, so the pan control comes in handy here. Pre controls the record gain. Rate and pan slew will make their respective changes glide instead of being sudden. While almost all the controls are laid out on the grid and are extremely playable, there are a few additional things I like to map. In this TouchOSC template, I have a fader for each track's volume, pan control, a global tempo fader, and a mod wheel-like control for the speed to give a pitch bend effect. I also like to have at least one of the track's faders snap back to 0 so that I can momentarily bring it in and out when I want. There will be a link to download this template below. In my opinion, MLR is an essential script. It's an amazing performance tool as well as a great piece of gear for composing. The gesture controls are so simple to use but so inspiring. I wish every script had them. Since I got Norns, MLR has made an appearance on almost every record I've released, and on my last solo project, I made an entire beat just using it. I love how versatile it is, and it's a really nice way to add some interesting material to any genre of music. That's going to do it for today. I know this was a long one. As always, thank you for watching, and if you have any topics or scripts you'd like me to cover in a future video, leave a comment below. I'll see you next week.